Thank you very much, Kevin, and my thanks to the Delphi Economic Forum and Professor Featherstone and our very good friends at the Hellenic Observatory of the LSE for the opportunity to set the scene before today's discussion on the UK's relationship with Europe and the impact of Brexit on the British and EU economy. Of course, economics is not an exact science, so it's going to be a fascinating hour and a half to hear the differing analysis, assumptions and predictions of our distinguished LSE panel. But I don't think it'll be possible to discuss the outlook for the UK's relationship with Europe and its impacts without first having a look at the kind of relationship the United Kingdom is seeking to achieve after our exit, and what is in the hands of the negotiators over the next 2 years to achieve and to shape. So many of you will be familiar with the vision of the future EU-UK partnership and our core objectives that our Prime Minister Theresa May set out in January, and what is in the more detailed white paper that was published last month. But I'll make no apology for setting it out again now just to kick off today's debate. Because if we reach the kind of deal that the UK government aspires to, the economic outcomes for both the UK and the EU, we believe, will be more favourable for all. We're leaving the EU, but we want to put in its place a new relationship with the EU and its member states, a close, wide-ranging and strategic partnership. And as we've said, we're leaving the EU, but not leaving Europe. We'll stay reliable partners, willing allies, and close friends with our neighbours when we have so many values and interests in common. And this approach recognises the logical consequences of Brexit. As you know, it was, among other things, a vote for national decisions on laws and national control over the movement of people. But we respect the fact that EU leaders believe the 4 freedoms are indivisible. We do not want to undermine the single market. We do not want to undermine the European Union. We want the EU to be a success, and we want its remaining member states to prosper. So instead, our aim is to agree a bold, ambitious economic relationship that has the fewest possible barriers to trade in goods and services. We want to see the closest and widest possible access to the single market for goods and services, including zero tariffs on goods. And this kind of trade deal should give European and British companies the maximum freedom to trade with and operate within each other's markets. And we also want Britain to be able to negotiate its own trade agreements, but also for cross-border trade to be as frictionless as possible. That means we don't want to be part of the common commercial policy or be bound by the common external tariff. And we don't have any preconceived position as to whether that means we must reach a completely new customs agreement, become an associate member of the customs union, or remain a signatory to some elements of it. It's not the means that matter, but the ends, as I've described. So this is an ambitious agenda, but it's the right one. It's one that's in the interests both of Britain and the EU and its member states. It respects the integrity of the single market and its 4 freedoms on the EU side, and we're not trying to undermine that, as I've said. And the agreement may take in elements of current single market arrangements, but in certain areas, as it makes no sense to start from scratch when Britain and the EU have adhered to the same rules for so many years. And we want this change from where we are now as EU members to our new partnership to be as smooth and orderly as possible in our common economic interest. We don't want any cliff edges, but that doesn't mean we'll seek some form of unlimited transitional status. That would not be good for Britain or the EU. So instead, we want to have reached an agreement about our future partnership by the time the 2-year Article 50 process has concluded. And from that point, we believe a phased process of implementation will be in our mutual self-interest. That will allow for a period in which both Britain and the EU institutions and member states prepare for the new arrangements that will exist between us, as well as a time for businesses to plan and prepare. Let me come on to free movement. While we will control the movement of people between Britain and the rest of Europe, we do not want to erect barriers to travel, and we will continue to welcome European talent to Britain. And as you know, we want to see an agreement to mutually guarantee the rights of British citizens living in EU member states and the rights of EU member states citizens living here as soon as possible. But the partnership is not just about economics. We want a strategic partnership so we can continue to work closely with our European partners on European security, foreign and defence policy, both at home and in our neighbourhood. We want to be able to work with the EU and its member states to promote our shared values and interests beyond Europe. So although the UK is leaving the EU, we believe that with ambition and imagination, we can construct a new and equal partnership that strengthens both the UK and the EU, both economically and more widely. That's the scenario we want, but we know these are going to be tough negotiations, and there's a risk that the only settlement on the table is not a mutually beneficial one, but one that offers a punitive deal with the main purpose of discouraging other countries from taking the same path. To use a well-known English phrase, and I hope this translates into Greek, we believe that would be cutting off one's nose to spite one's face. No one would benefit from such an outcome and would not be something the UK government could accept. As the Prime Minister has said, no deal for Britain is better than a bad deal for the UK. But let me turn for a moment, if I have a little more time, to the implications. Yes, the prospect of Brexit is an unprecedented challenge, both for the UK and the EU, and it has significant economic implications for us all in Europe. But that doesn't mean that we face inevitable economic recession and shrinkage. Can I just remind you what happened in the economy since the 23rd of June last year? Many of you will recall there were very negative, pessimistic forecasts about the impact of a Brexit yes vote on the UK economy, including indeed by the Bank of England itself. But these predictions in the 8 months now since the vote have been disproved. The new GDP figures show the economy grew by 0.5% in the 3 months following the Brexit vote. A recent Bank of England report upgraded the forecasted growth for 2017 to 1.4%. Employment remains at a record rate of 74.5%, 31.8 million people in work, and the number of UK businesses at a record high. Business confidence in the last quarter of 2016 showed a 0.5% quarter-on-quarter increase, and that's part of a clear, steady month-on-month trend. And on consumer spending, the Governor of the Bank of England said in a speech, actually at the LSE quite recently, that consumer spending had held up since last summer's vote to leave. And he commented, at present, households appear to be entirely looking through Brexit-related uncertainties. The savings rate has fallen towards its pre-crisis lows, and consumer borrowing has accelerated notably. Of course, he also warned that living costs were likely to rise on the back of a weak pound and squeeze households' real incomes. And I do recognise too there are uncertainties about the future trend of sterling and other factors such as business investment. I'm sure we'll hear a bit more about these impacts from our expert panellists. But it is worth reminding ourselves of the economic fundamentals. The UK is the 5th largest economy in the world and 2nd fastest growing major economy last year. We're ranked in the top 6 countries in the world as a place to do business. As I said, we have record employment, and the deficit has been cut by almost 2/3 since its peak in 2010. The UK is ranked first in the world for global contribution to science and technology. London, the top centre for finance, business and culture. Just as an example, and forgive me, Kevin, for singling out Oxford, but it tops the Times Higher Education World University rankings with 3 UK universities in the top 10, and I could go on. So these fundamental strengths give us much confidence in the UK about the response of our economy to Brexit and optimism for the future. It'll be very interesting to hear our speakers' views, but it is hard to see how a country with such advantages will be plunged into a major economic recession as a result of Brexit, because so many of those positive advantages and factors do not depend on European Union membership. So as I've said, the plan that the UK government has set out for our future relationship with the EU would not only preserve and enhance the UK's economic prosperity, but that of our EU partners too. We're sure that positive agreement can be reached, confident that the shared values and spirit of goodwill that exists on both sides will prevail. That is the economically rational thing for both Britain and the EU, because cooperation is needed not just when it comes to trade, but when it comes to security too. Και καταλήγοντας, αν μου επιτρέπετε λίγα λόγια στα ελληνικά, επειδή βρισκόμαστε στην Ελλάδα, ήμουν πρέσβης της Ηνωμένου Βασίλειου εδώ στην Ελλάδα για 2 μήνες μόνο, αλλά μιλώντας και ακούγοντας εκπρόσωποι της ελληνικής κυβέρνησης, της επιχειρηματικότητας και άλλων φορέων εδώ, πιστεύω ότι αυτός ο στόχος είναι κατανοητός εδώ. Εννοείται, υπάρχει λύπη και μάλιστα άγχος, θα έλεγα, για την αποχώρησή μας από την Ευρωπαϊκή Ένωση. Είμαστε ένας στενός εταίρος και συμμάχος της Ελλάδας. Αλλά δεν έχω ακούσει καμία φωνή που δεν υποστηρίζει ότι η προτεραιότητα της Ελλάδας πρέπει να είναι να συμβάλλει σε την ομαλότερη δυνατή διαδικασία αποχωρήσεως και να συμβάλλει στην χάραξη μια στενή επικοδομητικής στρατηγικής σχέσης στο μέλλον. Και ότι η διαδικασία πρέπει να είναι καθόλου τιμωρητική. Εκεί ακριβώς το Ηνωμένο Βασίλειο στοχεύει ένα ισχυρός και φιλόδοξος συνεταιρισμός, μια καινούρια θετική και επικοδομητική σχέση που θα αντικαταστήσει την θεσμική σχέση που έχουμε σήμερα. Και μια σχέση που θα πιστεύουμε θα ωφελήσει και τις δύο πλευρές και που σέβεται την ευθύτητα των θέσεων της Ευρωπαϊκής Ένωσης. Παρά τις εξέλιξεις στο Κοινοβούλιο των Λόρδων αυτή την εβδομάδα, η κυβέρνηση είναι σε σωστή τροχέα για την ενεργοποίηση του άρθρου 50 με το χρονοδιάγραμμα που η Πρωθυπουργός έχει θέσει. Όταν αυτό έγινε, η μπάλα θα περάσει στην Ευρωπαϊκή Ένωση για να ανταποκριθεί με τις αρχικές οδηγίες για τις διαπραγματεύσεις και τις περιμένω με ανυπομονησία. Και η σύνθεση της εναρχικής θέσης δεν θα αφορά μόνο την Ευρωπαϊκή Επιτροπή, αλλά και τα κράτη-μέλη. Και εγώ προσωπικά πίζω πάρα πολύ ότι οι έντονα ενδιαφέροντα της Ελλάδας και την δύναμη και οι δεξιότητες της ελληνικής διπλωματίας θα παίξουν ένα σημαντικό ρόλο σε αυτές τις διαπραγματεύσεις. Ευχαριστώ πολύ. Thank you very much.